The security guards threw her scrubs into the rain-soaked parking lot like garbage. Sarah Reeves stood there, drenched, watching her name badge land in a puddle. The same badge she'd worn for 3 years at Riverside General Hospital while they treated her like she was invisible. Dr. Marcus Aldrich had just fired her in front of the entire ER staff, calling her incompetent, claiming she'd violated protocol. She didn't fight back, didn't scream, just turned to leave. Then the ambulances came screaming into the bay and everything shattered. Soldiers, blood everywhere, federal agents flooding the corridors, and one dying man reaching for her wrist, whispering words that made the entire room go silent. "Captain, they found us." The doctor who humiliated her went pale, because Sarah Reeves wasn't just a nurse, and the people who destroyed her were about to learn exactly what happens when you push the wrong person too far. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Stick around until the very end, because what happens next will leave you speechless. If you're hooked, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. Now let's get back to the night everything fell apart. The fluorescent lights in the emergency department never stopped buzzing. Sarah had learned to tune them out over the past 3 years, the same way she'd learned to tune out the whispers, the sideways glances, the casual cruelty that came with being the nurse nobody respected. She moved through the chaos of Riverside General's ER with practiced efficiency, restocking supply carts while doctors barked orders and nurses rushed past her like she wasn't there. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, her scrubs worn thin from too many shifts, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. "Reeves!" The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Dr. Marcus Aldrich stood near the central station, his expensive watch catching the light as he gestured impatiently. "The trauma bay needs restocking. Try to get it right this time." Sarah nodded without meeting his eyes. "Yes, doctor. And maybe move a little faster? We're not running a retirement home here." A few nurses glanced over, then quickly looked away. Nobody ever stood up for Sarah. Nobody ever asked why Aldrich seemed to have a personal vendetta against the quiet nurse who never caused problems, never complained, never pushed back no matter how badly she was treated. She grabbed the supply cart and wheeled it toward the trauma bay, her hand steady despite the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest. 3 years of this. 3 years of being invisible until someone needed a target. The trauma bay was empty for the moment, the calm before the next wave of emergencies. Sarah worked quickly, checking inventory, replacing depleted supplies, making sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. This was the part of the job she understood, the preparation, the precision, the quiet competence that kept people alive even when nobody noticed. "You used to be military, right?" The voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to find Dr. Rebecca Chen leaning against the doorframe. Chen was one of the few people in the hospital who didn't treat her like furniture. "A long time ago," Sarah said quietly. "Aldrich mentioned it once, called you a field medic playing nurse." Chen's expression darkened. "He's an asshole. He's the trauma director." "He's still an asshole." Chen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know he's been building a case against you, right? Looking for any excuse to get you fired." Sarah's hand stilled on the supply cart. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I know that, but Aldrich doesn't care about right or wrong. He cares about control." Chen hesitated. "Just be careful. Something's off about all this." Before Sarah could respond, the overhead PA system crackled to life. "All available staff to the ER bay. Multiple trauma incoming. ETA, 2 minutes." The two women exchanged glances, then moved. Sarah pushed the cart back toward the central station while Chen jogged toward the bay doors. The hospital transformed in seconds, organized chaos as doctors and nurses prepared for whatever was about to come through those doors. Sarah had just reached the supply room when Aldrich's voice stopped her cold. "Reeves, my office. Now." She turned slowly. The trauma director stood near the administrative corridor, his face set in hard lines. This wasn't about supplies or protocol. This was something else. "There are incoming traumas. I'm aware." His tone left no room for argument. "Office. Now." Sarah followed him down the corridor, her mind racing through the past few shifts, trying to figure out what she'd done wrong. Behind them, the sounds of the ER faded into muffled chaos as Aldrich pushed open his office door and gestured her inside. He didn't sit, just turned to face her with his arms crossed. I've been reviewing your performance over the past several months, he began. Multiple incidents of protocol violations, failure to follow chain of command, and general incompetence that puts patients at risk. Sarah's jaw tightened. That's not true. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying I haven't violated any protocols. I do my job exactly the way I was trained. Aldrich's smile was cold. Your military training doesn't mean anything here, Reeves. This is a real hospital, not some field tent in the desert. You're out of your depth, and frankly, you're a liability. Then show me the incidents you're talking about. Sarah's voice remained steady. Show me what I did wrong. I don't need to justify my decisions to you. He pulled a folder from his desk and dropped it in front of her. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending a full investigation. You're to leave the premises and not return until you're contacted by HR. Sarah stared at the folder, her mind struggling to process what was happening. 3 years of perfect attendance, of going above and beyond, of taking every shift nobody else wanted, and this was how it ended. You can't do this during a mass casualty situation. I can do whatever I want. I'm the trauma director, and you're nobody. Aldrich stepped closer, his voice dropping. You think you're special because you were in the military? You're not. You're just another nurse who couldn't hack it in a real medical setting. Now get out of my hospital before I call security. Sarah picked up the folder, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear. From something else. Something she'd spent years pushing down, keeping locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone. Dr. Aldrich, we're done here. She walked out of his office on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The corridor seemed longer than before, the fluorescent lights harsher. Behind her, she heard Aldrich's door slam shut. By the time she reached the ER, security was already waiting. 2 guards in ill-fitting uniforms stood near the entrance, their radios crackling with chatter from the incoming trauma. One of them stepped forward when he saw her. Sarah Reeves? She nodded, unable to speak. We need you to come with us. You're being escorted off the premises. The ER had gone quiet. Every doctor, every nurse, every tech was watching. Sarah felt their eyes on her like physical weight as the security guards moved to either side of her. I need to get my things from my locker. We'll bring them to you, the first guard said. Let's go. They walked her through the ER like she'd committed a crime, past the nurses she'd worked alongside for 3 years, past the supply room she'd restocked 1,000 times, past the trauma bay where she'd helped save more lives than she could count. Dr. Chen stood near the central station, her expression stricken. She started to move forward, but another nurse grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Nobody said a word. The rain had started by the time they reached the parking lot. Sarah stood under the overhang while one of the guards went to retrieve her belongings. The other one stayed with her, his hand resting on his radio like she might try to run. She wouldn't run. She never ran. The first guard returned carrying a clear plastic bag with her street clothes, her phone, her wallet. He dropped it unceremoniously on the wet pavement near her feet. There. You're done here. Sarah bent to pick up the bag, her fingers numb. When she straightened, she saw more staff members watching from the windows above. Some looked shocked. Most just looked away. The guards turned and headed back inside, leaving her alone in the rain. She stood there for a moment, water soaking through her scrubs, watching the place she'd given 3 years of her life treat her like she'd never mattered at all. Then she turned toward her car, keys clutched in one hand, bag of belongings in the other. That's when the sirens started. Not one ambulance, not 2. At least 4, maybe 5. Their wails cutting through the rain as they screamed toward the ER bay. Sarah froze halfway across the parking lot, instinct overriding everything else. She knew that sound, the specific pattern of sirens, the way they overlapped and echoed off the buildings. This wasn't a normal trauma call. This was something catastrophic. The ambulances came into view, a convoy of emergency vehicles flanked by black SUVs with tinted windows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Those weren't civilian vehicles. The ambulances screeched to a halt in the ER bay, and the doors flew open. Paramedics jumped out, shouting medical codes that made Sarah's blood run cold. But it wasn't the paramedics that made her stop breathing. It was the patients. Military personnel in combat fatigues, their uniforms torn and blood-stained. At least 8 of them, maybe more, being rushed through the bay doors on gurneys. And surrounding them, men in tactical gear with weapons drawn, their faces hidden behind masks and visors. Sarah's mind went blank. Then it snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. She dropped her bag and ran. The security guards saw her coming and moved to intercept, but Sarah slipped past them before they could react, her body remembering training she thought she'd left behind years ago. She burst through the ER doors and into absolute pandemonium. Blood everywhere, doctors shouting, the wounded soldiers crying out in pain while tactical operators barked orders and shoved medical staff aside. Aldrich was screaming at someone, demanding to know what was happening, why armed men were in his hospital. Sarah moved on autopilot, pushing through the chaos toward the nearest gurney. A soldier, maybe 25 years old, his face gray with shock and blood loss. She grabbed his wrist, checking his pulse, her training taking over. "Somebody get me a pressure dressing," she shouted. A nurse she didn't recognize threw her a package. Sarah ripped it open and pressed it against the worst of the soldier's wounds, applying pressure while she assessed the rest of his injuries. Chest trauma. Possible internal bleeding. He needed surgery immediately. "What the hell are you doing?" Aldrich's voice cut through the noise. "Reeves, you're suspended. Get away from that patient." Sarah ignored him, focused on keeping the soldier alive. She called out vital signs, demanded supplies, coordinated with the other nurses who'd moved in to help despite the armed men watching their every move. "I said get away from him." Aldrich grabbed her shoulder, trying to pull her back. Sarah spun on him, her voice sharp. "This man is bleeding out. Either help or get out of my way." For a second, Aldrich looked like he might call security again. Then one of the tactical operators stepped between them, his masked face inches from the doctor's. "Let her work." Aldrich stepped back, his face flushed with rage. Sarah returned her attention to the soldier, working quickly to stabilize him enough for transport to surgery. Around her, the ER had transformed into something that looked more like a field hospital than a civilian medical center. Military personnel everywhere, federal agents in suits, armed operators watching every doorway. She was moving to the next gurney when someone grabbed her wrist. Another soldier, this one conscious but barely. His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow, but his grip was strong as he pulled her down toward him. "Captain," his voice was barely a whisper. "They found us." Sarah went rigid. The soldier's eyes cleared slightly, focusing on her face. Recognition flickered there. You got out, but they found us anyway." Time seemed to stop. Every sound in the ER faded to white noise. Sarah stared at the soldier, her mind racing, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. He knew her. Not as Sarah Reeves, ER nurse, as someone else, someone she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. "What did you just call her?" The voice came from behind Sarah. She turned slowly to find Dr. Chen staring at her, then at the soldier, then back at her. "He called you captain," Chen said quietly. "Not nurse. Captain." The soldier's hand slipped from Sarah's wrist as he lost consciousness again. Sarah stood, her legs unsteady, and found herself facing a room full of people who'd suddenly gone very quiet. Aldrich stood near the central station, his expression caught between confusion and fury. One of the tactical operators had removed his mask, and he was looking at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "Everybody out." The new voice echoed through the ER with absolute authority. A man in a military dress uniform strode through the bay doors, flanked by more armed personnel. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. His eyes swept the room, assessing the situation in seconds before landing on Sarah. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. "Clear this area, Sia," he ordered. "All non-essential personnel back to the main hospital. Medical staff, continue treating the wounded. Everyone else, out. Now." Nurses and doctors scrambled to comply. Aldrich started to protest, but one look from the military officer silenced him. The officer walked straight towards Sarah, his boots clicking on the blood-stained floor. She stood her ground, her face carefully neutral, even as her mind screamed at her to run. He stopped 3 feet away. "Lieutenant Reeves," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." The room went completely silent. Sarah felt every eye in the ER turn toward her. Chen's mouth had fallen open. Aldrich looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "That's not my rank anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady despite everything. No, the officer agreed, but it was once. And these men, he gestured toward the wounded soldiers, they need someone who understands what happened to them. Someone who was there. Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. They hit the convoy 2 hours ago. Same pattern as before. Same weapons. Same tactics. You told us this would happen. You warned everyone who'd listen, and nobody believed you. That was a long time ago. The past has a way of catching up. The officer glanced at the wounded soldiers, then back at Sarah. We need your help. These men need your help. I'm just a nurse. You were never just anything, Lieutenant, and you know it. Before Sarah could respond, one of the soldiers started seizing. Alarm shrieked as his vitals crashed, and suddenly everyone was moving, medical training overriding everything else. Sarah was at his side in seconds, helping to stabilize him while doctors shouted orders and nurses scrambled for medication. The officer stepped back, watching her work with an expression that might have been respect. 15 minutes later, the soldier was stable and being prepped for emergency surgery. Sarah stood back, her scrubs now covered in blood, her hands shaking from adrenaline. Aldrich appeared at her elbow, his face twisted with rage and something else. Fear, maybe. What the hell is going on? He demanded. Who are you, really? Sarah turned to face him, suddenly too tired to care about consequences. I'm someone who tried to do the right thing once, and it cost me everything. That's not an answer. She's a war criminal, one of the tactical operators interrupted, his voice carrying across the ER. Wanted for questioning about unauthorized combat operations and the deaths of multiple soldiers under her command. Sarah's blood went cold. The operator pulled out a badge. Federal agent, not military. His smile was thin and dangerous. Sarah Reeves, you're under arrest for desertion, dereliction of duty, and conspiracy to commit murder. He moved toward her, handcuffs already out. Sarah didn't move, didn't run, just stood there while the ER erupted into chaos around her. But the military officer stepped between them, his hand on his sidearm. That's not happening, he said quietly. The federal agent's smile vanished. Excuse me? I said that's not happening. Lieutenant Reeves is under military protection. She's a deserter. She's a witness. And these men, the officer gestured toward the wounded soldiers. They're proof that everything she tried to tell us was true. So unless you want to explain to a congressional committee why you tried to arrest the only person who can help us stop this, I suggest you back off. The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Then more vehicles screeched to a halt outside. Helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights flooding through the windows. And Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about her anymore. Whatever she'd been running from for 3 years had finally caught up, and everyone at Riverside General Hospital was about to learn exactly what happens when you corner someone who's got nothing left to lose. The federal agent's radio crackled. His expression went blank, then hardened into something ugly. He looked at Sarah with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Sarah standing in a blood-soaked ER, surrounded by soldiers who knew her secret and civilians who were only just beginning to understand that the quiet nurse they'd dismissed was someone else entirely. Aldrich grabbed her arm. You need to tell me what's happening, right now. Sarah pulled free, her patience finally snapping. What's happening is that people are dying because nobody wanted to listen when I tried to tell the truth. What's happening is that I gave up everything to protect soldiers like these, and I got buried for it. What's happening is that you just suspended someone who might be the only person in this building who knows how to keep these men alive. She turned to the military officer. What do you need me to do? He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a phone and made a call. This is Colonel Matthews. I need a full lockdown at Riverside General Hospital. Nobody in or out without clearance. And get me the Director of Military Intelligence. We have a situation. He hung up and looked at Sarah. These soldiers were part of a classified transport operation. Someone ambushed them with military-grade weapons and tactical knowledge that shouldn't exist outside of special operations. 4 men are dead. 8 more are critical, and every single one of them has one thing in common. They were all part of your unit 5 years ago. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. That's impossible. The unit was disbanded. Everyone was reassigned, Everyone except the ones who knew too much. Matthew's voice was grim. You tried to expose illegal medical trials being conducted on active duty personnel. You filed reports, you went through proper channels, and then you disappeared. I didn't disappear. I was forced out. By who? Sarah looked at the federal agent's retreating form. Then she looked back at Matthews. By people who had a lot to lose if anyone found out what they were doing to us. Aldrich made a strangled sound. This is insane. You're telling me this nurse, this woman I fired, was involved in some kind of military conspiracy? I'm telling you, Matthews said coldly, that Sarah Reeves is one of the most decorated combat medics in recent military history. She saved 23 soldiers during a single evacuation under heavy fire. She ran classified operations in 3 different combat zones. And when she discovered that someone was using soldiers as test subjects for unauthorized medical experiments, she reported it and got buried for her trouble. He turned back to Sarah. The convoy wasn't random. They were being transferred to a secure facility to testify. Someone found out. How? Sarah's voice was barely audible. That's what we need to figure out. Because whoever hit that convoy had inside information, and they're still out there. The ER doors burst open again. More military personnel flooded in, along with federal agents carrying equipment and laptops. Within minutes, the entire emergency department had been transformed into a command center. Sarah stood in the middle of it all, her mind reeling, while Aldrich watched from the sidelines with an expression of growing horror. You knew, Sarah said quietly, turning to face him. You knew something was wrong. That's why you've been trying to get rid of me for months. Someone told you to. Aldrich's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Sarah stepped closer. Someone's been pulling strings, getting me fired, making sure I'm discredited before anyone takes me seriously. Who was it, Marcus? Who told you to destroy my career? Nobody told me anything. Aldrich's voice rose. You're paranoid. She's right. Matthews pulled out a tablet and brought up a series of emails. Dr. Aldrich has been receiving instructions from an encrypted account for the past 8 months. Instructions specifically designed to isolate and remove Lieutenant Reeves from this hospital. Aldrich backed away, his eyes wide. I was just following protocol. You were following orders from someone who's been trying to silence her. Matthew's expression was iced up, which makes you complicit in whatever's coming next. Before anyone could respond, the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing the ER in red emergency lighting. Alarms shrieked. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. Matthews grabbed his radio. Report. Explosion in the East Wing, a voice crackled back. Security breach at multiple entry points. We have armed contacts moving through the lower levels. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. They'd found her. And they weren't going to let anyone walk away this time. Matthews locked eyes with her. How many people know you're here? I don't know. I've been hiding for 3 years. Well, they know now. He turned to his men. Full defensive positions, protect the wounded, and someone get Lieutenant Reeves' body armor. She's about to remember exactly why the military wanted her in the first place. Sarah stared at the body armor being thrust into her hands by a young soldier who looked barely old enough to vote. The vest was heavy, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. She hadn't worn one of these in 3 years, and putting it on now felt like admitting that everything she'd tried to leave behind had been waiting for her all along. Put it on, Matthews barked, already moving toward the ER entrance where his men were establishing a perimeter. Her fingers fumbled with the straps. Muscle memory kicked in halfway through, and suddenly she was moving faster, more efficiently, securing the vest the way she'd done hundreds of times in places where hesitation meant death. Aldrich stood frozen near the central station, his face slack with shock. This can't be happening. This is a hospital. This is a war zone now, Matthews said without looking at him. And you need to make a choice, doctor. Either help us protect your patients or get the hell out of my way. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. The windows rattled in their frames, and somewhere above them, ceiling tiles crashed to the floor. The wounded soldiers on gurneys cried out, their vitals spiking as monitors shrieked warnings. Sarah's training overrode her fear. She moved to the nearest soldier, checking his IV lines, adjusting his oxygen. A nurse she'd worked with for 2 years stood paralyzed nearby, her hands shaking. Kelly, Sarah said sharply, I need you to focus. Check his pressure dressing and make sure the bleeding hasn't restarted. Kelly blinked, then nodded. her hand steadying as she moved to help. Matthews was shouting orders into his radio, coordinating with teams throughout the hospital. I need a sit rep on all entry points. How many hostiles are we looking at? The radio crackled. Unknown. Multiple targets, heavily armed, moving with military precision. They're not trying to hide. They're pushing straight toward your location. Sarah felt ice slide down her spine. These weren't opportunistic attackers. They knew exactly where she was and exactly what they wanted. They're coming for the soldiers, she said, loud enough for Matthews to hear. The ones who survived. Whatever they're trying to hide, those men can testify to it. Matthews' jaw tightened. Then we hold this position. No one gets through. Sir, we can't defend this location, one of his soldiers protested. Too many access points, too much glass. This ER is a kill box. Then we move the wounded. Where's the most defensible location in this building? Aldrich stepped forward, his medical authority finally overriding his shock. The surgical wing, 3rd floor. Reinforced doors, limited access, and we can lock it down from the inside. How long to move everyone? 10 minutes if we're fast. You've got 5. Matthews turned to his men. Prepare to move all casualties. Establish a defensive line at the stairwells. Anyone who's not medical or military stays behind. Sarah grabbed a gurney, helping to stabilize one of the soldiers for transport. Around her, the ER transformed into controlled chaos as nurses and doctors worked alongside military personnel to prepare the wounded for evacuation. She was securing an IV bag when she heard glass shatter at the far end of the corridor. Everyone froze. Matthews held up one hand, his other on his sidearm. The soldiers around him raised their weapons, moving into defensive positions with practiced ease. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Slow, deliberate, not running, not hiding. A man emerged from the shadows wearing tactical gear that looked expensive. Professional mercenary equipment, not military issue. His face was covered by a mask, but his eyes were visible. Cold. Dead. He stopped when he saw the armed soldiers, then slowly raised his hands. I'm looking for Sarah Reeves, he said, his voice distorted by a modulator. Send her out, and everyone else walks away. Matthews stepped forward. That's not happening. Then a lot of people are going to die in the next few minutes. The man tilted his head. Your choice, Colonel. One woman or everyone in this hospital. Sarah felt every eye turn toward her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face blank, refusing to show fear. Who sent you? She called out. The man's eyes found her through the crowd. Does it matter? You know too much. You've always known too much. And now your friends are about to pay for your mistakes. My mistakes? Sarah's voice went sharp. I tried to stop what was happening. I reported it through every channel. I did everything right. And look where it got you. The man lowered his hand slightly. You could have walked away, could have taken the discharge and stayed quiet. But you couldn't let it go, could you? People were dying. People always die. The question is whether you want to add everyone in this hospital to that list. He paused. Last chance, Reeves. Come with me now, or I give the order. Matthews raised his weapon. You're not taking her anywhere. The man's hand moved to his radio. Sarah made her decision in a heartbeat. She started forward, pulling free from the nurse beside her. Matthews grabbed her arm. What are you doing? Saving lives, Sarah said quietly. That's what I've always done. They'll kill you the second you step out of this hospital. Probably. She looked at the wounded soldiers, at the terrified medical staff, at Kelly, who was still gripping a pressure bandage with white knuckles. But if I don't go, everyone here dies. You know I'm right. I can't let you do this. The man's radio crackled before Sarah could respond. His head jerked up, listening to something in his earpiece. Then his posture changed, tension radiating through his body. What the hell? He pressed his hand to his ear. Say again, what do you mean they're here? Behind him, the corridor filled with new sounds. Boots. Lots of them. Orders being shouted in voices that carried military authority. The masked man spun around just as a new team of soldiers appeared, these ones wearing different uniforms, different insignias. They moved with the kind of precision that made Matthew's team look like reservists. Drop your weapon, the lead soldier's voice boomed. You're surrounded. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the masked man grabbed for his sidearm. He was fast, professional, trained. But Sarah was faster. She moved without thinking, her body remembering training that had been drilled into her until it became instinct. She closed the distance between them in 4 strides, catching his wrist as he drew, twisting hard. The gun clattered to the floor. The man tried to counter, but Sarah was already inside his guard, driving her elbow into his ribs, then sweeping his legs. He went down hard. Sarah stepped back, breathing heavily, her hands raised to show the incoming soldiers she wasn't a threat. The man groaned on the floor, trying to get up, but 2 soldiers were already on him, forcing him down, securing his wrists with zip ties. Matthews stared at her. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" "Field training." Sarah's voice was flat. "You learn a lot when people are actively trying to kill you." The lead soldier from the new team approached, removing his helmet. He was older than Matthews, his face weathered and scarred, his eyes carrying the kind of weight that came from seeing too much. "Captain Reeves," he said quietly, "it's just Sarah now." "Not anymore, it isn't," he gestured to his team. "General Morrison sends his regards. He also says it's time you stopped running." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Morrison? I thought he was retired?" "He was. Until your old unit started dying under suspicious circumstances and someone decided it was time to figure out what the hell actually happened 5 years ago." The soldier extended his hand. "Major Garrett, I've been trying to find you for 6 months." Sarah didn't take his hand. "If you've been looking for me, then you've been reading my file. You know what happened. You know why I left. I know what the official reports say. I also know that official reports are sometimes complete bullshit." Garrett lowered his hand. "We need to move. There are more hostiles in the building, and they're not going to stop just because we grabbed one of them." "How many?" Matthews demanded. "At least a dozen, possibly more. Professional contractors, well-funded, well-equipped. They've been systematically hunting down everyone connected to the medical trials. The convoy survivors were supposed to be the final loose ends." Garrett looked at Sarah. "Except you. You're the one they really want, because you're the only person who can connect all the pieces." "I don't know anything." "You know who authorized the trials, you know who signed off on the illegal testing, and you know which soldiers died because someone needed to cover their tracks." Garrett's voice hardened. "That information is worth killing for, which is why we need to get you somewhere secure before they bring this entire hospital down around us." Another explosion, this one on a different floor. The building shuddered. Fire alarms began wailing, adding to the chaos. "We need to move the wounded now," Aldrich said, his voice cracking. "If there's a fire—" "There's no fire," Garrett interrupted. "They're hurting us, pushing us toward specific locations. This is a tactical maneuver, not random violence." "Hurting us where?" Sarah asked. Garrett's expression went grim. "Somewhere they can finish what they started, somewhere with limited exits and no witnesses." Matthews swore under his breath. "The surgical wing. That's where we were taking everyone. Then we go somewhere else." Garrett pulled out a tablet, bringing up hospital schematics. "What about the basement? Sub-level parking?" "No defensible positions," Matthews said. "We'd be trapped. Then we split up. Some of us create a distraction while the rest evacuate the wounded through." "Nobody's splitting up," Sarah's voice cut through the argument. Both officers turned to stare at her. "That's what they want. Divide our forces, pick us off one by one. We stay together, we protect the wounded, and we find a way to turn this around." "With all due respect," Garrett said carefully, "you're a nurse, not a tactical commander, so I was a combat medic who ran evacuation operations under fire for 3 years. I've extracted wounded soldiers from worse situations than this." Sarah looked at the terrified faces around her, nurses, doctors, patients. "And I'm not letting anyone die because someone wants me silenced." Garrett and Matthews exchanged glances. Then Matthews nodded slowly. "What's your plan?" Sarah moved to the tablet, studying the hospital layout. Her mind was racing, pulling together fragments of training and experience, looking for options that didn't end with everyone dead. "Here," she said, pointing to a section of the building. "The old radiology wing. It was shut down 2 years ago due to budget cuts. Reinforced walls because of the lead shielding, multiple exits through the maintenance corridors, and nobody uses it anymore." "Why would that help us?" Aldrich asked. "Because they won't expect it. They're tracking us based on where we should go, places that make sense, places that follow protocol. But if we move to an abandoned section, we buy time to regroup and figure out our next move." Garrett frowned. It's risky. If they figure out where we are, then we're in the same position we're in now, except with better defensive options. Sarah met his eyes. Unless you have a better idea? Nobody did. All right, Matthews said. We move in two groups. First group takes the wounded, establishes position in the old radiology wing. Second group provides cover and watches our six. Garrett, your team takes point. My people will cover the rear. Where do you want me? Sarah asked. With the wounded. You're the primary target, which means you're staying in the most protected position. Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She nodded and moved back to the gurneys, helping nurses prepare for transport. Kelly appeared at her elbow, her face pale but determined. I'm coming with you. You should stay here. It's safer. Nothing's safe anymore. Kelly's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. And these patients need medical staff who can think clearly. So I'm coming. Sarah squeezed her shoulder briefly, then turned to help lift the first gurney. They moved fast, abandoning the elevators in favor of the stairwells. The wounded soldiers groaned as they were carried up the stairs, their pain meds wearing off, their bodies protesting every jolt. Sarah kept up a steady stream of reassurances, checking vitals, adjusting IV lines, doing everything she could to keep them stable during the chaos. Behind them, she could hear gunfire. Distant at first, then closer. The tactical team was engaging the hostiles, buying them time. They reached the third floor and pushed through a maintenance door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The corridor beyond was dark, lit only by emergency lighting. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale. Sarah helped guide the gurneys through the narrow hallway, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The old radiology wing appeared ahead, its doors sealed with faded warning signs about radiation exposure. Matthew's team forced the doors open. Inside, the space was exactly what Sarah remembered. A warren of small examination rooms surrounding a central nurse station, all of it wrapped in lead-lined walls that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to track them with thermal imaging. Set up here, Matthews ordered. Medical staff, get the wounded stabilized. Everyone else, defensive positions at all entry points. Sarah worked alongside Kelly and two other nurses, converting the dusty examination rooms into makeshift treatment areas. The wounded soldiers were positioned based on the severity of their conditions, the most critical closest to the nurse station where Sarah could monitor them constantly. Aldrich appeared in the doorway, his expensive shoes now covered in dust, his professional composure shattered. I need to understand what's happening. Why would someone attack a hospital? Why are they trying to kill soldiers? Sarah didn't look up from the IV line she was adjusting. Because those soldiers know the truth about medical experiments that killed at least 15 people, and the people responsible don't want that information getting out. What kind of experiments? The kind that promised enhanced combat performance and faster healing. The kind that sounded too good to be true, because they were. Sarah's jaw tightened. They used active duty soldiers as test subjects without consent. When people started dying, they covered it up, called them combat casualties, blamed enemy action, anything to avoid taking responsibility. That's insane. Who would authorize something like that? People who thought soldiers were expendable. People who cared more about results than lives. Sarah finally looked at him. People like the ones who've been pulling your strings for the past 8 months. Aldrich recoiled. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Sarah turned away from him, focusing on her patient. Now either help or get out. We don't have time for your crisis of conscience. Garrett entered the room, his expression tense. We've got a problem. The hostiles have cut off our primary exit routes. They're not pushing in yet, but they're surrounding this position. How long until they breach? Matthews asked. Hard to say. Could be minutes, could be hours. Depends on what they're waiting for. Sarah's hand stilled on the bandage she was securing. They're waiting for orders. Someone's coordinating this attack. And that person is trying to decide whether to risk a full assault or find another way to eliminate the witnesses. Who? Garrett demanded. Who's running this operation? I don't know. That's the truth. 5 years ago, I filed reports about the medical trials. I documented everything I could find. Then one day, I was called into my CO's office and told I was being discharged for conduct unbecoming. No trial, no investigation, just gone. Sarah's voice went hollow. 3 weeks later, everyone else who'd been involved in filing those reports was either dead or disappeared. I ran because I knew I was next. And you've been hiding ever since, Matthews said quietly. I've been surviving. There's a difference. The radio on Matthews' belt crackled. Sir, we've got movement on the second floor. Looks like they're setting up some kind of equipment. What kind of equipment? Unknown, but it's big, and they're pointing it at the ceiling, right below your position. Sarah felt her blood run cold. They're going to breach from below, come up through the floor where we won't see them until it's too late. Matthews swore and grabbed his radio, barking orders to reposition his team. Soldiers scrambled to adjust their defensive positions, some moving to cover the floor while others maintained watch on the doorways. Kelly grabbed Sarah's arm. We can't move these patients again. Some of them won't survive another transport. Then we don't move them. Sarah looked around the room, her mind racing. We hold this position. We make it so difficult to take that they'll have to reconsider whether it's worth the cost. With what? Aldrich's voice cracked. We're medical staff, not soldiers. We have a handful of armed personnel against a dozen professional killers. This isn't some action movie. We're going to die here. Maybe, Sarah said, but not without making them pay for it. She moved to the nurse station and began pulling open drawers, searching for anything useful. Old supplies, outdated equipment, broken monitors, nothing that would help in a fight. Then she found it, a maintenance access panel in the wall. She pried it open and saw the electrical conduits running through the space behind the lead shielding. Matthews, she called out, how much explosive do your people carry? He appeared beside her, frowning. Some? Why? Because I'm about to give you away to even the odds. Sarah pointed to the conduits. These run through the entire building. If we can rig a controlled explosion in the right locations, we can bring down sections of the floor below us. Make it impossible for them to breach from underneath without bringing the whole ceiling down on their heads. That's insane, Aldrich said. That's warfare, Garrett corrected, studying the access panel with interest. It might actually work, but we'd need someone who knows the building's infrastructure well enough to target the right supports. I know the building, Sarah said quietly. I've worked here for 3 years. I know every corridor, every utility room, every structural weak point. Matthews looked at her for a long moment. You're talking about potentially collapsing part of the hospital. I'm talking about survival, and right now, those are the same thing. The radio crackled again. Sir, they're starting to cut. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach. Matthews made his decision. Do it. Garrett, get your demo expert up here. Reeves, show him what you need. Sarah was already moving, pulling up schematics in her mind, remembering late-night shifts and maintenance calls, building a mental map of the floor below. A young soldier appeared with a bag of supplies, and she walked him through exactly where to place the charges. Here, here, and here, she said, pointing to locations on the dusty floor. These are load-bearing points. Take them out, and the entire section becomes unstable. They try to breach, they risk bringing it all down. The soldier looked nervous but nodded, setting to work. Sarah returned to her patients, checking vitals one more time. The soldier who'd called her captain earlier had regained consciousness. His eyes found her through the dim light. You came back, he whispered. I never really left, Sarah said quietly. I just stopped fighting. But you're fighting now. Yeah, she adjusted his oxygen. I am. The explosion from below came without warning. Not from the charges Sarah's team had planted, from the hostiles breaching upward. The floor buckled, tiles cracking, dust pouring through new fissures. Shouts echoed from below, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Matthew's team returned fire through the gaps, forcing the attackers back. But Sarah could see it in their faces. This was a delaying action, not a victory. Sooner or later, the hostiles would push through. Detonate the charges, Matthews ordered. Now! The soldier at the detonator hesitated. Sir, if we bring down that section, do it! The explosion was massive. The entire floor shook, throwing everyone to the ground. Sarah covered her patients' bodies with her own as debris rained down, her ears ringing, her lungs filled with dust. When the shaking stopped, she looked up to see a massive crater where the floor had been. The breach point was gone, replaced by a smoking hole that dropped straight through to the level below, and beyond, into the basement. No one could breach through that now without climbing equipment, and a lot of time they didn't have. Matthews pulled himself up, coughing. Status report! All patients accounted for, Sarah called back, checking each gurney quickly. Somehow, miraculously, everyone had survived. But their celebration was short-lived. Garrett's radio crackled with a new voice. Not one of their soldiers, not a friendly call. Very clever, Captain Reeves. The voice was cold, professional. You've bought yourself some time. But time is all you've bought, because while you've been playing defense, I've been making arrangements. The entire hospital is now surrounded by law enforcement. Federal warrants have been issued for your arrest, and everyone in that room with you is about to be charged as accomplices to terrorism. Sarah felt ice slide through her veins. You're bluffing, she said. Am I? Look out the window. Matthews moved to the nearest window and pulled back the dusty blinds. His face went pale. Sarah joined him and felt her heart stop. The parking lot was filled with law enforcement vehicles. FBI, ATF, local police, all of them with weapons drawn, all of them pointed at the building, and standing at the center of it all, directing the operation with calm authority, was the federal agent who'd tried to arrest her earlier, the one who'd called her a war criminal, the one who was working with whoever wanted her dead. You have 1 hour, the voice on the radio continued. Surrender yourself or everyone dies. Your choice, Captain, but choose quickly, because in 60 minutes we're coming in, and we won't be taking prisoners. The radio went dead. Sarah stared at the scene below, her mind racing, her heart pounding, knowing with absolute certainty that surrender meant death. But so did Stain. Matthews looked at her, his expression grim. What do we do? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, one of the wounded soldiers sat bolt upright on his gurney, his eyes wide with sudden recognition. I know who ordered the trials, he gasped. I remember now. I saw the signature on the authorization forms. I know who's behind all of this. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Who? Garrett demanded. The soldier's face was white with shock and fear. It was us. The window exploded inward in a spray of glass and blood, and the soldier collapsed back onto the gurney with a hole in his chest, a sniper's bullet having found its mark from half a mile away. Sarah was moving before the soldier's body finished falling. She hit the floor hard, her shoulder slamming into old linoleum as more windows shattered inward. The crack of rifle fire echoed across the parking lot, and bullets chewed through the walls where people had been standing seconds before. Everyone down, Matthews roared, but half the room was already diving for cover. Kelly screamed as glass rained down on the gurney she'd been standing beside. Sarah crawled toward her, grabbed her ankle, and yanked her behind the nurse station. Another bullet punched through the space where Kelly's head had been. They've got snipers on multiple buildings, Garrett shouted from somewhere across the room. At least 3 positions, maybe more. Sarah pressed herself against the desk, her mind racing. The sniper had fired the instant the soldier started talking, which meant someone had been listening. Someone knew exactly when to give the order to kill. Matthews, she called out, they're monitoring our communications. Everything we say, they hear. He swore viciously and ripped the radio off his belt, smashing it against the floor. All teams, ditch your radios, they're compromised. But it was too late. The damage was done. The one person who could identify whoever authorized the medical trials was dead, and everyone else in this room now knew they were being watched, listened to, tracked like animals. Sarah crawled to the fallen soldier, her hands already moving to check for a pulse, even though she knew what she'd find. The bullet had taken him through the upper chest, probably clipping his heart. He'd been dead before he hit the gurney. She closed his eyes gently, her jaw tight. His name was Martinez, one of the other wounded soldiers said, his voice raw. Private First Class David Martinez. He was 23. Did he tell any of you what he remembered? Sarah asked quietly. Before now. Did he say anything about who signed the authorization? The soldiers exchanged glances. Most shook their heads, but one, a woman with her leg wrapped in heavy bandages, hesitated. He mentioned something yesterday, in the convoy before we got hit. Her voice was barely audible over the ringing in Sarah's ears. Said he'd been having nightmares about a meeting, about seeing paperwork he wasn't supposed to see. But he couldn't remember the details, just fragments. Did he say anything else? Anything at all? Just that whoever signed those papers had stars on their uniform, high-ranking, someone with enough power to make problems disappear. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Stars meant general officer, which meant this conspiracy reached all the way to the top of the military command structure. Aldrich had wedged himself into a corner, his face ashen. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. We're in a hospital, not a war zone. We're in both, Sarah cut him off. And if you want to survive the next hour, you need to accept that reality right now. More gunfire erupted from outside, but this time it wasn't aimed at their position. Sarah risked a glance out the shattered window and saw law enforcement vehicles taking fire from unknown positions. The scene below had transformed into absolute chaos. Federal agents diving for cover, police returning fire at targets Sarah couldn't see, civilians running in every direction. Someone shooting at the cops, Matthews said, crouched beside another window. Professional work. Coordinated. They're trying to create maximum confusion. Why? Garrett demanded. Sarah understood before either of them could answer. Because confused cops don't follow protocol. They shoot first and ask questions later. And if we try to surrender now, there's a good chance we get cut down in the crossfire, which is exactly what someone wants. So we're trapped, Kelly said. Can't stay, can't surrender, can't fight our way out. Not trapped. Sarah's mind was working through possibilities, discarding options as fast as they appeared. Cornered. There's a difference. Matthews looked at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that whoever's running this operation made a mistake. They've shown their hand. They tried to kill Martinez the second he started talking, which means they're desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind where they leave evidence behind, communications records, payment trails, witness testimony. Sarah looked at the surviving soldiers. You were all part of the original unit. You all participated in the medical trials, whether you knew it at the time or not. And every single one of you is a loose end that needs tying up. One of the soldiers, a staff sergeant with burns covering half his face, spoke up. We were told it was voluntary enhancement therapy, experimental treatments to improve combat performance and reduce recovery time from injuries. They made it sound like the future of military medicine. When did you start noticing problems? 6 months in. Guys started getting sick. Seizures, organ failure, psychiatric breaks. The medical staff kept saying it was unrelated, that we were just dealing with normal combat stress. But people were dying and the deaths kept getting classified under different causes. His hands clenched into fists. When Martinez tried to file a complaint, he got transferred to a different unit. 2 weeks later, his whole team got hit by an IED. He was the only survivor. Because someone made sure he survived, Sarah said quietly. They needed to know if he'd talked to anyone, if he'd kept records. They've been watching all of you for years, waiting to see if anyone would connect the dots. And when we finally got called in to testify, they decided to eliminate the problem permanently. Sarah stood slowly, staying low to avoid the windows. But they didn't count on you surviving the convoy attack, and they definitely didn't count on me being here when you arrived. Garrett had been quiet, listening. Now he moved closer, his expression grim. You said you filed reports 5 years ago. You must have documented who you reported to, who you spoke with. I did, but all my documentation disappeared when I got discharged. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence I'd collected, gone, like it never existed. Digital or physical? Both. Then how do you prove any of this actually happened? Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive that looked like it had been through hell. The casing was cracked, the metal connector bent slightly, but it was intact. Because I made backups, and I've been carrying them with me every single day for 3 years. The room went completely silent. Matthews stared at the flash drive like it was a live grenade. You've had evidence this entire time? I've had partial evidence. Names, dates, some medical records I managed to copy before they locked me out of the system. It's not complete, and I don't know if it's enough to prove anything in court, but it's something. Then why didn't you go public? Why didn't you give it to the media, to investigators, to someone? Because I tried that. The first journalist I contacted ended up dead in a car accident 3 days later. The second one suddenly recanted everything and moved to another country. After that, I realized that whoever was behind this had enough reach to make problems disappear. And I wasn't going to get anyone else killed trying to be a hero. So you just ran, Aldrich said, his voice bitter. You had evidence of criminal activity, and you ran. Sarah turned on him, her patience finally snapping. I survived. There's a difference. And while I was surviving, you were taking orders from the same people who wanted me dead.
helping them destroy my career and discredit me so that if I ever did come forward, nobody would believe a word I said. She stepped closer. So don't lecture me about courage when you've spent the past 8 months being their puppet. Aldrich flinched like she'd slapped him.
Before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the chaos. Helicopters. Multiple aircraft, military grade, coming in fast and low. Everyone moved to the windows. Sarah's heart sank. The helicopters weren't marked with standard military insignia. They were black, unmarked, and they were setting down in the parking lot with the kind of precision that suggested special operations. "Those aren't ours," Matthews said. "No," Garrett agreed. "They're not." Figures emerged from the helicopters, dozens of them, all wearing tactical gear that made the earlier attackers look like amateurs. They moved with synchronized efficiency, establishing a perimeter, setting up equipment, completely ignoring the law enforcement personnel who'd been surrounding the building moments before. Sarah watched federal agents try to approach, only to be stopped by men who flashed credentials that made the agents back off immediately. "What the hell kind of authority do you need to override federal law enforcement?" Kelly whispered. "National security," Sarah said. "The kind that comes with classified clearances and executive authority. They're not here to arrest anyone. They're here to clean up a mess." "By clean up, you mean? Kill everyone who knows too much and make it look like a terrorist incident or a hostage situation gone wrong. Blame it on extremists or foreign actors. Write whatever narrative they want because dead people can't contradict the official story." One of the soldiers began laughing, a harsh, bitter sound. "So that's it? We survive combat, survive an ambush, survive getting blown up in a convoy, just to get executed in a hospital by our own people." "Not if we don't give them the chance," Sarah said. Matthews turned to face her. "I'm listening." "Those helicopters, they're our way out. You want to steal military helicopters from a team of special operations soldiers, in the middle of a hospital, while we're outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped on the 3rd floor." "Yes." Matthews stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed, short, sharp, and slightly unhinged. "You're either brilliant or completely insane. I'm a combat medic who ran evacuations under fire for 3 years. I'm definitely both." Sarah moved to the tablet Garrett had been using earlier, pulling up the hospital schematics again. The parking lot sits directly above the emergency generator room and the main utility tunnel. If we can get down there, we can move through the tunnels to the far end of the lot, pop up behind their perimeter, take one of the helicopters before they realize we're not where they think we are. And how do we get down there without them seeing us? They've got snipers on every building, drones overhead, and enough manpower to cover every exit. We use the one route they won't expect. Sarah pointed to the schematics. The old pneumatic tube system. It runs from this building all the way to the basement, connecting to the maintenance tunnels. It hasn't been used in years, but the infrastructure is still there. Garrett looked at the schematic, then at Sarah. Those tubes were designed to carry medical samples and paperwork, not people. The tubes themselves, yes, but the access shafts are wider, big enough for someone to climb down if they're desperate enough. She met his eyes. And we're definitely desperate enough. Even if we get to the basement, we still have to cross open ground to reach the helicopters. They'll cut us down the second we surface. Not if they're dealing with a bigger problem. Sarah turned to Matthews. "How much explosive do your people have left?" "Some." "Why?" "Because we're going to give them something to focus on that isn't us. A distraction big enough that they'll commit their forces to dealing with it, leaving the helicopters vulnerable." "What kind of distraction?" Sarah looked at the medical equipment scattered around the room, at the oxygen tanks and chemical supplies, at the ancient infrastructure of a building that had been upgraded piecemeal for decades. Then she looked at Aldrich. "You know this hospital's systems better than anyone. Tell me about the emergency oxygen supply." Aldrich blinked, caught off guard. "What about it? How centralized is it? Where's it stored?" "There's a main tank farm in the sub-basement. Feeds the entire hospital through a distribution network. But it's heavily regulated, multiple safety systems." "Can those safety systems be overridden?" "Technically, yes, but you'd need administrative access and—" He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. "You want to create an explosion. I want to create a threat. Something big enough that they have to respond, that they can't ignore. And while they're busy dealing with it, we disappear. You'll kill people.
I'll evacuate them first. Every patient, every nurse, every doctor in the affected areas gets moved to safety before we trigger anything. But the special operations team outside doesn't know that. All they'll see is a potential catastrophe that could level half the building.
Matthews was nodding slowly.
They'll have to pull resources to contain it. Standard protocol for a chemical or explosive threat is to establish containment, evacuate the area, bring in specialists. That's a 30-minute response time minimum. And we only need 10 minutes to get from the basement to those helicopters. Sarah looked around the room. But we need to move now, before they breach this floor and take away our options. Garrett pulled his remaining soldiers into a quick huddle, speaking in low tones. Sarah turned to the wounded, checking each one quickly, assessing who could move under their own power and who'd need help. The staff sergeant with the burns grabbed her wrist. If we do this, if we actually pull this off, what happens next? We can't run forever. We don't run. We go public. We take the evidence I've been carrying and we give it to every media outlet, every congressional office, every inspector general we can find. We flood the zone with so much information that it becomes impossible to suppress. They'll kill us for that. They're trying to kill us now. At least this way we take them down with us. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'm in. The others agreed one by one. Even the most critically wounded soldiers volunteered to help, refusing to be left behind. Kelly moved beside Sarah. What do you need me to do? Help evacuate patients from the sub-basement areas. Quietly, calmly, like it's a routine drill. We don't want to start a panic. And if someone asks what's happening, tell them there's a gas leak. Tell them it's a precaution. Tell them whatever you need to tell them to get them moving. Sarah paused. And Kelly? Thank you. For staying, for believing me. Kelly's smile was shaky but genuine. You saved my life in the ER once. Pulled me behind a crash cart when a patient came in violent and swinging. You didn't hesitate, didn't think about it, just moved. I figured the least I could do was return the favor. Sarah hadn't remembered that incident. It had been just another shift, just another emergency. But Kelly had remembered. And in this moment, that memory mattered more than Sarah could put into words. Aldrich approached reluctantly. I can get you into the administrative systems, override the safety protocols on the oxygen farm. But if this goes wrong, we're dead anyway. At least this way we're trying. Sarah met his eyes. And Marcus? When this is over, when the truth comes out, you're going to have to answer for your part in all this. The way you treated me, the way you helped them isolate me. That's on you. He looked away. I know. But right now, I need you to help me save everyone in this building. Can you do that? He nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do that. They moved fast, splitting into teams. Matthews and Garrett took their soldiers to secure the access shaft and prepare the route to the basement. Kelly and the other nurses began the careful process of evacuating patients from the sub-basement, moving them to the opposite end of the hospital under the guise of a routine safety drill. Sarah and Aldrich headed for the administrative offices, moving through maintenance corridors and back stairwells to avoid detection. They passed terrified staff members huddled in storage rooms, barricaded in offices, hiding anywhere they could find. Sarah wanted to stop, wanted to reassure them, but there wasn't time. Every second they delayed was another second for the special operations team to breach the building and end this permanently. The administrative office was deserted, computers still running, but chairs empty. Aldrich sat down at the main terminal and began typing, his fingers moving with surprising speed. The safety systems are redundant, he muttered. Multiple lockouts, fail-safes, automatic shutdowns. I need to disable them in sequence without triggering alarms. How long? 5 minutes? Maybe less. Sarah moved to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The special operations team had finished establishing their perimeter and was now setting up for breach. She could see them organizing into assault teams, checking equipment, preparing to storm the building. They were running out of time. Aldrich, working on it. Sarah's radio, one of the backup units they'd found in the maintenance closet, crackled softly. Matthew's voice came through, distorted but clear enough. We're in position at the access shaft, ready to move on your signal. Copy that. Stand by. She looked back at Aldrich. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he typed, navigating through system menus and security protocols. His hands shook slightly. I used to think this job was about saving lives, he said quietly, not looking away from the screen, about being the best trauma director I could be, about building a reputation. He laughed bitterly. Then someone approached me, said they needed eyes inside the hospital, said it was a matter of national security. I didn't ask questions, I just did what they asked. And what did they ask you to do? Watch you. Report your schedule, your interactions, anytime you seemed like you might be reaching out to people outside the hospital. They said you were unstable, that you'd cause problems in the military, that you were a security risk. He finally looked at her. I believed them, because believing them was easier than asking why they cared so much about one nurse. You were a coward, Sarah said flatly. Yes, I was. The computer beeped. Aldrich turned back to the screen. I'm in. All safety systems are now disabled. The oxygen farm is completely unregulated. Can you trigger a controlled release? Make it look like a major leak without actually causing an explosion? I can flood the sub-basement with oxygen. That'll show up on every sensor in the building and set off every alarm. The response teams will have to treat it like an imminent explosion risk. Do it. Aldrich's hand hovered over the keyboard. If I do this, I'm finished. My career, my reputation, everything I built, it's gone. You lost that the moment you chose to help them. This is just you finally accepting it. He nodded slowly, then hit the enter key. Alarms erupted throughout the hospital. Not fire alarms. These were deeper, more urgent, the kind reserved for catastrophic system failures. Red emergency lights began strobing in the corridors. Automated announcements blared from speakers, ordering immediate evacuation of the South Wing. Sarah grabbed her radio. Matthews, go! Move now! She pulled Aldrich to his feet and they ran for the maintenance corridor. Behind them, she could hear shouting, running feet, the special operations team responding to the emergency exactly the way she'd hoped they would. The access shaft was hidden behind a storage room filled with outdated medical equipment. Matthews and his team had forced open the maintenance panel, revealing a vertical shaft that dropped 3 floors into darkness. A rusted ladder was bolted to one wall. Ladies first, Matthews said. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the ladder and started climbing down, her hands finding purchase on metal that was slick with condensation and years of accumulated grime. Above her, she heard the others following, soldiers helping the wounded move carefully, nurses climbing with determination despite their fear. The shaft seemed to go on forever. Sarah's arms burned, her shoulders screaming from the effort of supporting her weight on the ancient ladder. Once, her foot slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment she dangled by her hands alone before finding the rung again. Then her feet hit solid ground. She'd reached the basement. The maintenance tunnel stretched in both directions, dimly lit by emergency lighting. The air smelled of mold and chemicals, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the oxygen alarm still blaring. Matthews dropped down beside her, followed by Garrett, then the rest of the group. They moved quickly through the tunnel, following the route Sarah had memorized from the schematics. The wounded soldiers limped along with help from their comrades, refusing to slow the group down. They passed under the parking lot, beneath the feet of the special operations team that was scrambling to deal with the oxygen emergency. Sarah could hear vehicles moving above them, shouted orders, the organized chaos of a tactical response. The tunnel ended at a maintenance exit near the far edge of the lot, exactly where Sarah had hoped it would. Matthews forced open the rusted door, and they emerged into the cool night air behind a row of civilian vehicles, out of sight from the main response teams. The helicopters sat 200 feet away across open pavement. 2 of them, rotors still slowly turning, pilots visible in the cockpits. They'd been left minimally crewed because most of the special operations team had been pulled to deal with the oxygen crisis. 3 guards between us and the nearest bird, Garrett whispered. We take them fast and quiet, then run for it. Matthews nodded. On my mark. Sarah watched the guards, her heart pounding. This was it. Their one chance. Matthews gave the signal. His team moved like ghosts, closing the distance in seconds. The guards never had a chance to react before they were on the ground, unconscious or restrained. Matthews waved the group forward. They ran. Sarah helped support one of the wounded soldiers, half carrying him across the pavement, while Kelly did the same on his other side. The helicopter seemed impossibly far away, and every second felt like an hour. Someone shouted behind them. They'd been spotted. Move! Garrett roared. Gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked off the pavement. Sarah felt one pass close enough to her head that she heard the crack of displaced air, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They reached the helicopter. Soldiers threw themselves inside, hands reaching down to pull up the wounded. Sarah pushed Kelly up first, then followed, her muscles screaming. The pilot looked back at them in shock. "What the hell?" Matthews leveled his sidearm at the man's head. "Fly! Now!" The pilot's hands moved to the controls. The helicopter lifted off just as more gunfire raked across the landing skid. Sarah looked down and saw the special operations team running toward them, weapons raised, but they were already too high, moving too fast. The hospital dropped away beneath them. Sarah could see the chaos they'd left behind. Emergency vehicles, evacuated patients, law enforcement trying to maintain order while the special operations team scrambled to figure out what had just happened. Then they were over the city, moving fast and low, and the hospital disappeared behind them. Sarah collapsed against the helicopter wall, her entire body shaking from adrenaline crash. Around her, soldiers did the same, some laughing with relief, others crying, all of them struggling to process what they'd just survived. Kelly grabbed Sarah's hand and squeezed hard. Neither of them spoke. There weren't words for this. Matthews was on a radio, speaking quickly to someone. When he finished, he turned to Sarah. "We've got a secure location, safe house outside the city. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to respond. But Garrett was staring at his phone, his expression darkening. "We've got a problem." "What now?" Matthews demanded. Garrett turned the phone so they could see the screen. It was a news alert, already spreading across social media and news networks. "Terrorist attack at Riverside General Hospital. Domestic extremists take hostages. Threaten mass casualty event. Military nurse identified as primary suspect." Below it was a photo. Sarah's photo. Her military ID from 5 years ago alongside recent security footage from the hospital. "They're controlling the narrative," Garrett said, "calling us terrorists. By tomorrow morning, your face will be on every news channel in the country with a manhunt to match." Sarah stared at her own face on the screen, at the lies being spread, at the machinery of power working to bury the truth beneath an avalanche of propaganda. Then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She opened it. The message was simple. "You can't hide. You can't run. And nobody will believe you. Last chance, Captain. Destroy the evidence and disappear, or everyone you care about dies. You have 24 hours. Below it was a photo that made Sarah's blood freeze in her veins. It was Kelly's apartment, recent. Taken from inside, showing personal belongings, family photos on the walls. And in the corner of the image, barely visible, was Kelly's younger sister sleeping on the couch. Sarah looked up at Kelly, at the nurses and soldiers who'd risked everything to help her, at Matthews and Garrett who'd chosen to believe her story. They just made themselves targets, all of them. And whoever was behind this had just made it clear they'd kill anyone Sarah cared about to keep the truth buried. Sarah's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white. Kelly leaned over to look at the screen, and the color drained from her face. "That's my apartment. That's Emma." Her voice cracked. "My sister's 16. She doesn't have anything to do with this." "None of you do," Sarah said quietly. She looked around the helicopter at the exhausted faces staring back at her. Soldiers who'd trusted her, nurses who'd followed her into a war zone, officers who'd put their careers on the line. "Which is exactly why I'm getting off at the next stop. Alone." "Like hell you are," Matthews said. "They just showed us they can reach anyone. Kelly's sister. Your families. Everyone in this helicopter becomes a target the longer they stay with me." Sarah held up the phone. "They're not bluffing. They'll kill people to make their point." Garrett grabbed the phone from her hand, studying the image with cold focus. "This photo was taken in the last hour. See the timestamp on that TV screen? That's tonight's news broadcast, which means they had someone inside Kelly's apartment while we were escaping the hospital." "How is that even possible?" one of the soldiers demanded. "We just left 30 minutes ago." "Because they've been tracking us the entire time," Sarah said. "They knew we'd run, knew we'd take people with us. And they've been preparing contingencies." She looked at Matthews. "That safe house you mentioned? They probably know about it too." His expression darkened. "Then we need to go somewhere they won't expect." "There's nowhere they won't expect." That's the point. Sarah stood, moving toward the cockpit, despite the helicopter's turbulence. Put me down. Anywhere. I'll turn myself in, destroy the evidence, whatever they want. Just leave everyone else out of it. Kelly grabbed her arm. My sister is only in danger because someone wants to stop you from telling the truth. You really think they'll just let her go if you surrender? I don't know. Yes, you do. You know exactly what they'll do. They'll kill you, kill me, kill Emma, kill everyone on this helicopter, and then they'll sleep fine because that's what people like that do. Kelly's grip tightened. So stop trying to be noble and start figuring out how to beat them. The helicopter banked hard, and the pilot called back over his shoulder. We've got company. 2 aircraft closing fast from the southwest. Matthews moved to the window. Military? Can't tell. No transponders. But they're moving like they know exactly where we are. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Of course they were being followed. The special operations team wouldn't just let them fly away. They'd been tracking the helicopter since it lifted off, waiting to see where it went before making their move. How long until they're in range? Garrett demanded. 3 minutes, maybe less. Sarah's mind raced through options. They couldn't outrun military helicopters in a transport bird, couldn't outmaneuver them. And if those aircraft opened fire, everyone on board would be dead in seconds, unless they gave the pursuers a reason not to shoot. Get me a phone, Sarah said. One with a camera. Now. One of the soldiers handed her a smartphone. Sarah pulled out the flash drive from her pocket, the one she'd been carrying for 3 years, and held it up to the camera. What are you doing? Matthews asked. Changing the equation. Sarah started recording. My name is Sarah Reeves, former captain, United States Army Medical Corps. For the past 3 years, I've been hiding from people who want me dead because I have evidence of illegal medical experimentation on active duty soldiers. Evidence that implicates high-ranking military officers and federal officials in conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice. She turned the camera to show the wounded soldiers behind her. These men were part of those experiments. They survived an ambush tonight designed to kill them before they could testify. Right now, we're being pursued by unidentified aircraft, and I have every reason to believe those aircraft intend to shoot us down. Sarah looked directly into the camera. This flash drive contains names, dates, medical records, and authorization signatures. If anything happens to me or anyone on this helicopter, this footage and all the evidence will be automatically uploaded to every major news organization, congressional office, and inspector general in the country. That upload is already queued. The only thing stopping it is me actively canceling it every 15 minutes. She checked her watch. You have 14 minutes to decide whether killing us is worth the exposure. Choose carefully. Sarah stopped recording and immediately began uploading the video to multiple cloud services, using every account she could access. Within 90 seconds, the video was live on 3 different platforms with automated instructions to distribute it further if she failed to check in. That was either brilliant or suicidal, Garrett said. Probably both. Sarah handed the phone back. But now they can't kill us without guaranteeing the evidence goes public. We just bought ourselves time. The pilot called back. The aircraft are slowing. They're maintaining pursuit distance, but not closing anymore. Matthews exhaled slowly. It worked. They're not sure if you're bluffing. I'm not bluffing. Sarah pulled up her phone, showing him the automated upload schedule. Every 15 minutes, I have to enter a code. If I miss even one check-in, everything goes live, dead man's switch. And if they grab you, force you to cancel it, then I give them a code that looks right, but actually triggers immediate upload. Either way, the truth comes out. One of the soldiers started laughing, exhausted, slightly hysterical. We just went from hunted to hostage takers using ourselves as the hostages. That's insane. That's survival, Sarah corrected. She looked at Kelly. Where does your sister go to school? Lincoln High. Why? Because we need to get her somewhere safe. Somewhere these people can't reach her. Sarah turned to Matthews. You said you have a safe house. Is it actually secure or is it compromised? It was secure 3 hours ago. Now, I have no idea. Then we need to assume it's burned and find somewhere else. Somewhere off the books, no military connections, no federal ties. She paused. What about your old unit? Do you trust them? Matthews considered. A few, not many. I need one person, someone who can extract Kelly's sister without drawing attention, someone who won't ask questions and won't report back through official channels. That's a tall order. That's our reality.
Matthews pulled out his phone and made a call. The conversation was brief, cryptic, ending with coordinates and a time. When he hung up, he looked at Kelly. "Give me your sister's location. My guy will have her picked up within the hour and taken somewhere these bastards won't find her. He owes me enough that he won't ask why." Kelly rattled off the address, her voice shaking with relief. Sarah felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. One threat neutralized, but there were still dozens more, and the clock was ticking. The helicopter touched down 30 minutes later in an abandoned industrial park outside the city limits. The building they entered looked like it had been used for manufacturing once, but now it was just empty space and rusted equipment. No power, no running water. But it had walls and a roof, and most importantly, it wasn't on anyone's radar.
Matthews posted guards while Garrett worked on establishing communications using equipment they'd salvaged. The wounded soldiers settled onto the floor, exhausted beyond the point of complaint. Kelly and the other nurses did what they could with limited supplies, checking vitals, rebandaging wounds, making sure nobody was going into shock.
Sarah stood near a broken window, watching the darkness outside, waiting for her phone to alert her when it was time for the next check-in. 9 minutes left on the clock. Aldrich appeared beside her, looking lost in a way she'd never seen him look before. His expensive clothes were torn and filthy, his usual confidence shattered.
"I need to know something," he said quietly. "When you were in the military, when you found out about the experiments, did you ever think about just walking away? Just pretending you didn't see anything?" "Every day," Sarah admitted. "It would have been easier, safer. I could have finished my contract, taken my discharge, moved on with my life." "But you didn't."
No. Because the people dying in those experiments were soldiers I'd served with. People who trusted the system to protect them. And if I walked away, I'd be just as guilty as the people running the program. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. "I walked away. When they asked me to help discredit you, to make sure you couldn't cause problems, I told myself it was for the greater good. That sometimes individuals have to be sacrificed for national security." He laughed bitterly. "I was just scared. Scared of losing my position, my reputation, my comfortable life." "Yeah," Sarah said, "you were. I don't expect forgiveness."
"Good, because I don't have any to give." She turned to face him. "But I do need your help. The evidence on that flash drive is incomplete. I don't have the full authorization chain. Don't know who was at the top giving orders. The only way to fill in those gaps is to access military medical databases, and I can't do that anymore." "What makes you think I can?"
"Because you've been taking orders from someone for 8 months. Someone with enough clearance to know about me, about the trials, about everything, and they had to communicate with you somehow. Email, phone calls, something that left a digital trail." Aldrich's face went pale. "If I help you trace those communications, you'll be admitting you were part of the conspiracy. Yes, but you'll also be the one who helped bring it down. That might count for something when this goes to trial." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The emails were always from encrypted addresses, routed through multiple servers. I don't know if they can be traced. "Let Garrett try. He's got resources." They brought Garrett the phone. He took one look at the email headers, and his expression went cold. "These routing protocols, I've seen them before." He looked up at Matthews. "This is SOCOM-level encryption, Special Operations Command. Whoever was giving Aldrich orders had access to some of the most classified communication networks in the military." "Can you trace it?" Sarah asked. "Not me, but I know someone who can." Garrett made another call, speaking in technical jargon Sarah couldn't follow. When he finished, he looked grim. "My contact needs 3 hours and direct access to military servers, which means we need to physically get inside a secure facility." "That's impossible," Matthews said. "We're wanted fugitives. We can't just walk onto a military base. We don't walk on." Sarah was already thinking through the logistics. "We break in, tonight, before they have time to lock down every access point. That's suicide." "So is sitting here waiting for them to find us?" Sarah checked her phone. 6 minutes until the next check-in. "They've already proven they can track us. Already proven they have resources we can't match. Our only advantage is speed. We move fast, get the information we need, and get out before they can respond." Garrett pulled up a map on his tablet. "Nearest military installation with the right server access is Fort Harrison, 20 miles west. It's a logistics base, not combat operations, so security is lighter. But it's still a military facility with armed guards and surveillance. What's the weakest entry point? Loading docks on the east side. They handle civilian contractors during the day, so the security protocols are less strict. At night, there's usually a skeleton crew. Sarah studied the map, her mind working through approach vectors and timing. We need a distraction, something to pull security away from the server room long enough for us to get in and out. I have an idea, one of the soldiers said. He was the staff sergeant with the burns, the one who'd spoken about Martinez. Fire alarm, set it off in the barracks section. That'll pull every available person to deal with the evacuation. Standard protocol. How do we set off an alarm without being on base? He grinned, though it looked painful through the scarred tissue. You don't need to be on base. You just need to call it in. Anonymous tip about smoke in the barracks. They have to respond. Once they do, you've got maybe 10 minutes before they realize it's a false alarm. It was risky, crude, and it might actually work. Sarah looked at Matthews. Your call, your people, your risk. He met her eyes for a long moment. Martinez died because someone wanted to keep him quiet. So did 15 others before him. We don't make this right. Their deaths mean nothing. He turned to his team. Gear up. We move in 30 minutes. They spent the next half hour preparing. Garrett briefed them on the base layout, identifying the route from the loading docks to the administration building where the servers were housed. Matthews distributed the remaining weapons and equipment. Kelly insisted on coming, arguing that they might need medical support. Sarah didn't try to stop her. They were past the point of keeping anyone safe. The drive to Fort Harrison took 15 minutes. They parked in a commercial lot 3 blocks from the base perimeter and approached on foot, moving through shadows and side streets like they'd done this 100 times before. The loading docks were exactly where Garrett said they'd be. A chain-link fence with a rolling gate, minimal lighting, 1 board guard visible in a security booth. Beyond the fence, Sarah could see storage buildings and transport vehicles. The staff sergeant made the call from a burner phone. Fire department? I want to report smoke coming from buildings at Fort Harrison. Looks serious. You should probably send someone. He hung up before they could ask questions. 3 minutes later, sirens wailed inside the base. Sarah watched through the fence as personnel emerged from buildings, moving with urgent purpose toward the barracks section. The guard in the booth received a radio call and immediately abandoned his post, jogging toward the commotion. That's our window, Matthews whispered. Move. They cut through the fence with bolt cutters and slipped inside, moving fast and low between buildings. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, every shadow feeling like a threat, every sound like an alarm about to be raised. They reached the administration building without being spotted. Garrett picked the lock on a side entrance, and they were inside, moving down corridors lit only by emergency lighting. The server room was on the 2nd floor. Garrett got to work immediately, connecting his equipment to one of the terminals, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Sarah and Matthews stood guard while the others watched the corridors. How long? Sarah asked. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if the encryption's heavier than I thought. They waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Sarah checked her phone, 2 minutes until her next check-in to prevent the evidence from uploading. She entered the code quickly, buying herself another 15 minutes. Outside, she could hear vehicles moving, voices shouting. The false alarm was being resolved faster than they'd hoped. Garrett, I'm working on it. More footsteps in the corridor, getting closer. Matthews raised his weapon, signaling for everyone to take defensive positions. The footsteps passed by their location, moving toward the stairwell at the far end of the hall. Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Got it, Garrett said suddenly. The encryption was routed through 3 different servers, but the original sender left traces. Very faint, but they're there. He pulled up a file on the screen. The orders to Aldrich came from an office inside the Pentagon. Deputy Director of Medical Research and Development. Who's the Deputy Director? Matthews demanded. Garrett opened another file, and a photo appeared on the screen. Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. She knew that face. Had seen it 5 years ago in a classified briefing. Had saluted that person dozens of times. Brigadier General Patricia Vance, Garrett read. 30-year career, multiple commendations, currently serving as the 2nd highest authority in military medical research. He looked up. She's the one who authorized the experiments, and she's been covering it up ever since. Download everything, Matthews ordered. Every file, every communication, every piece of evidence. Garrett was already moving, transferring data to multiple drives. This is going to take 3 minutes. Alarms began blaring throughout the building. Not fire alarms, security alarms. They know we're here, Sarah said. How? Kelly demanded. Sarah looked at the terminal, at the active connection Garrett had established. We triggered something, a silent alert when we accessed those files. They've been monitoring for any unauthorized access. We need to go, Matthews said. Now. Not without the data, Garrett insisted, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. Footsteps thundered in the stairwell. Multiple people, moving fast. Sarah grabbed one of the completed drives and shoved it in her pocket. Take what you have and let's move. They ran for the exit they'd used to enter, but guards were already pouring through that entrance. Matthews fired twice, forcing them back, then led the group in the opposite direction toward the emergency exit at the rear of the building. They burst through the door into the night air, just as military police vehicles screeched into the parking lot. Spotlights swept across the grounds, searching for targets. Sarah and the others sprinted for the perimeter fence, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. One of the soldiers went down, hit in the leg. 2 others grabbed him and kept running, half carrying, half dragging him toward safety. They made it through the cut fence and into the streets beyond, sirens wailing behind them, helicopters sweeping overhead with searchlights. But they had the evidence. They had Vance's name. They had everything they needed to prove the conspiracy reached to the highest levels of military command. Back at the industrial building, Garrett immediately connected the drive to his laptop and started copying files to the cloud. Sarah watched the upload progress, her mind racing through next steps. We need to go public, she said, right now, before Vance has time to spin this or disappear. With what? Matthews asked. We have digital files that could be dismissed as forgeries. We need something more concrete. We have witness testimony, Sarah countered. 8 surviving soldiers who participated in the trials, medical records, authorization signatures, and we have a general who's going to claim it's all fabricated by terrorists trying to undermine national security, Garrett said grimly. The news media is already running stories about us being domestic extremists. We need to control the narrative before she does. Sarah pulled out her phone and made a decision she'd been avoiding for 3 years. She called the one journalist who'd survived their investigation 5 years ago, the one who'd been scared enough to leave the country but smart enough to keep their contact information. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. This is Marcus Webb. It's Sarah Reeves, and I'm ready to tell you everything. There was a long silence. Then, are you somewhere safe? For now, but that could change any minute. Send me your location. I'm bringing cameras. Marcus Webb arrived 90 minutes later in an unmarked van with 2 camera operators and enough recording equipment to fill a small studio. He looked older than Sarah remembered, grayer, thinner, with the kind of exhaustion that came from years of looking over his shoulder. You look like hell, he said when he saw her. You should see the other guys. Webb didn't smile. He set up his equipment in the corner of the industrial building that had the best lighting, positioning cameras at multiple angles while his crew ran sound checks. The wounded soldiers watched from their makeshift beds, curious but wary. Before we start, Webb said, adjusting a camera lens, I need to know you understand what you're doing. The second this interview goes live, there's no taking it back, no walking away. You'll be painting a target on yourself that will never disappear. The target's already there, Sarah said, has been for 3 years. At least this way, I'm shooting back. Webb nodded slowly. Then let's make it count. He positioned Sarah in front of the camera with the wounded soldiers visible behind her, a deliberate choice to show viewers that this wasn't just one person's story. This was real. This had victims. The red recording light came on. State your name and rank, Webb said from behind the camera. Sarah Reeves, former captain, United States Army Medical Corps. Tell me what happened 5 years ago. Sarah took a breath and began speaking. She laid out everything, the medical trials, the soldiers who died, the authorization signatures she'd discovered, the reports she'd filed that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She talked about being forced out of the military, about running, about watching everyone else who knew the truth die under suspicious circumstances. Then she held up the flash drive. This contains evidence of conspiracy, murder, an obstruction of justice reaching to the highest levels of military medical research. Names, dates, medical records, communication logs, everything needed to prove that Brigadier General Patricia Vance authorized illegal human experimentation and then spent 5 years covering it up. Webb leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. What proof do you have that General Vance was directly involved? Sarah nodded to Garrett, who pulled up files on a laptop and turned the screen toward the camera. Authorization forms with Vance's signature, email chains discussing test subjects and acceptable casualty rates, budget allocations for projects that officially didn't exist. These documents were stored on encrypted military servers, Sarah continued. Servers that General Vance personally controlled access to. The encryption protocols, the authorization chains, the oversight committees, all of it leads back to her office. And the soldiers behind you? Survivors of the convoy attack earlier tonight. An attack designed to eliminate the last witnesses before they could testify about what was done to them. Sarah's voice hardened. 15 soldiers died in those experiments. Tonight, someone tried to add 8 more to that list. They failed. The staff sergeant with the burns moved into frame, his scarred face catching the light in a way that made the damage impossible to ignore. "My name is Staff Sergeant Luis Reyes," he said. "I volunteered for what I was told was an enhancement program. Better healing, faster recovery, improved performance. What I got was organ failure, seizures, and burns over 40% of my body when the chemical compounds they injected reacted with combat stress." He looked directly into the camera. "They told us it was safe. They lied. And when people started dying, they covered it up." Another soldier spoke, then another, each one adding their testimony, their injuries, their losses. By the time they finished, even Webb's camera operators looked shaken. "What do you want to happen now?" Webb asked Sarah. "I want justice. I want the people responsible held accountable. I want the families of the soldiers who died to know the truth about what happened to their loved ones." She paused. "And I want every person watching this to understand that when we give the government power over our lives, over our bodies, over our safety, we have to demand transparency. Because without it, this is what happens. People die in the dark, and nobody asks questions." Webb let the silence hang for a moment, then spoke again. "You're aware that General Vance will deny everything, that she has resources you can't match, lawyers you can't afford, and political connections that reach into the highest levels of government? I'm aware. Then why do this? Why not take the evidence to federal prosecutors? Let them handle it quietly." Sarah almost laughed. "Because federal prosecutors have had chances to handle this for 5 years. Because official channels are how truth gets buried. Because the only way to force accountability is to make it impossible for them to hide." She leaned toward the camera. "So yes, General Vance will deny it. She'll call me a liar, a terrorist, a disgruntled former soldier with an agenda, and maybe some people will believe her. But the evidence speaks for itself, and the families of the dead deserve to hear it." Webb ended the recording and immediately began uploading it to multiple platforms. Sarah watched the progress bars crawl across his screen, her heart pounding. "This is going to explode," Webb said. "Once it hits social media, mainstream news will have to cover it. They'll try to spin it, try to control the narrative, but the raw footage will be out there. People will see it. How long until it goes viral? If we're lucky, an hour. If we're not, they'll try to shut it down before it spreads." He looked at her. "You should prepare for what comes next. Death threats, harassment, people trying to discredit you in every way possible. I've been preparing for that for 3 years." The video went live at 3 in the morning. By 4, it had been shared 10,000 times. By 5, major news networks were running clips with breaking news banners. By 6, the hashtag Vance Conspiracy was trending nationwide. Sarah watched it spread on a borrowed tablet, sitting against the wall of the industrial building with Kelly beside her. The comments section was a war zone, some people calling her a hero, others calling her a traitor, most just demanding answers. "It's working," Kelly said quietly. "Maybe." Sarah wasn't convinced yet. Going viral was one thing, getting actual justice was another. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Captain Reeves, The voice was female, cold, controlled. "This is General Vance." Sarah's blood went cold. She put the phone on speaker so the others could hear. "I don't use that rank anymore.
No, you don't. Because you threw it away when you decided to betray your country. Vance's voice was like ice. That video you released is filled with classified information. You just committed multiple federal crimes on camera. The only crime committed was the one you've been covering up for 5 years. You have no idea what you've done. The programs you're trying to expose were designed to save lives, to give our soldiers advantages that would bring them home alive. Yes, there were complications. Yes, we lost people, but that's war. People die. The question is whether their deaths serve a greater purpose. Sarah felt rage building in her chest. You experimented on soldiers without consent. You killed 15 people and called it acceptable losses. And when witnesses tried to come forward, you had them silenced. I protected national security. I made hard choices that weak people like you don't have the stomach for. Vance's voice hardened. You want to paint me as a monster? Fine. But understand this. Every enemy combatant killed by soldiers who benefited from those programs, every American life saved because we developed better combat medicine, that's on me too. I carry those successes the same way I carry the failures. You don't get to claim credit for lives saved when you murdered people to hide your failures. Watch me. Vance paused. You released that video thinking it would destroy me. It won't. By tomorrow morning, I'll be on national television explaining how a disturbed former soldier stole classified information and endangered national security. I'll have testimonials from decorated officers. I'll have medical experts explaining why the research was necessary. And I'll have enough political backing that your little crusade will be dismissed as conspiracy theory. The evidence will be questioned by people far more credible than you. You're a nurse, Captain. I'm a general with 30 years of service and connections in every major institution. Who do you think people will believe? Sarah looked at the tablet beside her, at the video still spreading, at the thousands of comments from people demanding answers. They'll believe the truth, she said. Eventually, because you can't control the narrative when the evidence is public. You can't make this disappear. Maybe not, but I can make you disappear. Vance's voice dropped. That video made you famous. It also made you a target. Every extremist group, every foreign intelligence service, every person with an axe to grind against the military will come after you. And when something happens, when you end up dead in an alley or killed in a suspicious accident, people will assume it was your enemies, not me. The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen, the phone still in her hand. Around her, the others had gone silent. She just threatened to kill you, Matthews said, on a recorded line. She knows I can't prove she was serious. It'll be written off as a figure of speech. Sarah looked at the phone. But she's right about one thing. I just made myself the most visible target in the country. Then we keep you somewhere she can't reach, Garrett said. There is nowhere she can't reach. She has resources, connections, and enough deniability that even if something happens to me, she'll never be connected to it. Sarah stood, pacing. We need to force her hand, make her respond publicly where she can't hide behind official channels. How? Kelly asked. Sarah thought for a moment, then looked at Webb. Can you get me on national television? Live interview, no delay, questions I can't predict? Probably. Why? Because General Vance is planning to do damage control. She's going to go on TV and discredit everything I said, so I want to be there when she does it, face to face. Let her try to call me a liar while I'm sitting across from her with evidence in my hand. Webb's eyes widened. That's insane. She'll destroy you. She's going to try anyway. At least this way I control the confrontation. Sarah looked around the room at the exhausted faces watching her. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. I'm done running. Webb made calls, pulled favors, called in debts from 20 years of journalism. By noon, he'd arranged something that should have been impossible, a live debate on national television between Sarah Reeves and Brigadier General Patricia Vance, moderated by one of the most respected journalists in the country. The network was calling it The Truth About Medical Trials, a national conversation. Sarah knew it was a trap. Vance would have prepared answers, coached responses, political backing. She'd have makeup, a tailored uniform, every advantage that power and position could provide. Sarah would have the truth, and 8 wounded soldiers willing to testify on live television. The broadcast was scheduled for 8 that evening. Sarah spent the day preparing, reviewing evidence, talking through strategies with Matthews and Garrett. Kelly helped her find clothes that didn't look like she'd been living in an abandoned building.
borrowed from someone's car, wrinkled but clean. They arrived at the television studio with an hour to spare. Security was heavy, metal detectors, armed guards, producers checking credentials multiple times. Sarah moved through it in a daze, her mind focused on what was coming. Vance was already there. Sarah saw her through a window, perfectly composed in her dress uniform, medals gleaming, hair styled, speaking calmly with producers. She looked like exactly what she was, a decorated military officer with nothing to hide. Sarah looked like exactly what she was, a tired woman who'd been fighting for 3 years and was down to her last play. They were kept separated until airtime. Sarah sat in a green room with the soldiers who'd agreed to appear on camera, going over what they'd say, how they'd respond to attacks on their credibility. "She's going to try to make us look unstable," Rhea said. "Question our mental health, our reliability. Standard discrediting tactics." "Then we stay calm," Sarah said. "We stick to facts. We don't get emotional, don't get defensive. Just tell the truth and let viewers decide." A producer knocked on the door. 5 minutes. Sarah stood, smoothing her borrowed clothes, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Kelly grabbed her hand. "You've got this. You didn't survive 3 years of running just to lose now." Sarah squeezed back. "If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, make sure the evidence gets to the right people. Congressional oversight committees, inspector generals, anyone who'll listen. Sarah, promise me." Kelly's eyes were bright with tears. "I promise." They walked onto the set together. The studio audience was packed. Journalists, military personnel, families of soldiers. Sarah recognized some of them from her research. Parents whose sons had died in the trials, siblings demanding answers. Vance sat in one chair, Sarah in another, with the moderator between them. The lights were blinding, cameras everywhere. The moderator spoke to the camera. "Good evening. Tonight we're addressing allegations that have shocked the nation, claims of illegal medical experimentation on military personnel, and a subsequent cover-up reaching the highest levels of command. With us tonight are Brigadier General Patricia Vance and former Captain Sarah Reeves." She turned to Vance first. "General, Captain Reeves has released evidence suggesting you authorized illegal human trials. How do you respond?" Vance's expression was perfectly calibrated, concerned but confident. "I want to be clear about something from the start. The programs Captain Reeves is referring to were experimental medical research conducted under strict oversight with full authorization from appropriate authorities. Were there risks? Yes. Did we lose people? Tragically, yes. But to characterize this as illegal experimentation is not only false, it's an insult to those brave soldiers who volunteered to help advance military medicine. Captain Reeves claims soldiers weren't properly informed of the risks. Captain Reeves was discharged for conduct issues and has spent 3 years making increasingly wild accusations. I sympathize with her mental health struggles, but personal grievances don't change facts." Vance looked directly at the camera. "Every participant in these programs signed consent forms. Every protocol was reviewed by medical ethics boards. Every step was documented and authorized. What Captain Reeves is describing simply didn't happen." The moderator turned to Sarah. "Your response?" Sarah pulled out a folder of documents. "These are consent forms from the trials. They describe routine medical procedures and standard enhancement protocols. Nowhere do they mention experimental compounds, unknown side effects, or the possibility of organ failure and death. Soldiers signed these thinking they were getting approved treatments. They weren't told they were test subjects." "Those forms went through legal review," Vance started. "By lawyers who worked for you," Sarah cut in. "And when soldiers started dying, those same lawyers classified the deaths as combat-related to avoid investigation. That's a serious accusation." "It's documented fact." Sarah handed papers to the moderator. "These are death certificates for 15 soldiers who participated in the trials. Every single one lists cause of death as combat action. But the autopsy reports tell a different story. Organ failure consistent with toxic exposure, seizures from neurological breakdown, cardiovascular collapse from chemical compounds. None of it from enemy fire. All of it from what you injected into them." Vance's composed expression cracked slightly. "Those reports are classified." "They were classified. Now they're public record." Sarah looked at the camera. "And the families of those soldiers deserve to know the truth about how their loved ones died." The moderator gestured to the audience. We have several family members here tonight. Mrs. Patterson, your son died 4 years ago. You were told it was an IED. What's your reaction to what you're hearing? A woman in her 50s stood, her hands shaking. My son called me 2 weeks before he died. Said he wasn't feeling well. Said the doctors kept telling him it was stress, but he knew something was wrong. Then we got the call that he'd been killed in an attack. Her voice broke. If what Captain Reeves is saying is true, if my son died because of experimental drugs, then the people responsible need to answer for it. Other family members stood, echoing similar stories. Vance's jaw tightened. I understand these families are grieving, she said carefully, but grief doesn't change what happened. These soldiers died serving their country. They died because you poisoned them, Reyes said, standing from his seat in the audience. His burned face was stark under the lights. I was in those trials, General. I remember you coming to the facility, telling us we were the future of military medicine. You looked me in the eye and promised the treatments were safe. Then I watched 3 men seize and die in the same week, and your people told us it was combat stress. Vance stared at him. I don't know who you are. Yes, you do. Staff Sergeant Luis Reyes, 3rd Battalion, Medical Trial Group 7. You personally approved my participation. He held up his scarred hands. This is what your safe treatment did to me. Other soldiers stood. The moderator tried to regain control, but the studio had transformed into something raw and real, beyond the carefully managed debate format. You promised us we'd be heroes, another soldier said. You promised our sacrifices would save lives. What you actually did was use us as lab rats and throw us away when we became inconvenient. Vance's composure was crumbling. These men are being manipulated. By who? Sarah demanded. By the truth? By evidence you can't deny? You're sitting here in your medals and your uniform acting like you're the victim, but you're not. They are. She gestured to the soldiers. The 15 who died are. The families who were lied to are. You're just the person who decided their lives were acceptable losses. I made decisions that saved thousands. You made decisions that benefited your career. Sarah's voice rose. Every successful project got you promoted. Every advancement got you funding. And when things went wrong, when people died, you buried it because admitting failure would hurt your reputation. How dare you? How dare you? Sarah stood facing Vance directly. You had power. You had responsibility. You had soldiers who trusted you to protect them. And you betrayed that trust for funding and promotions and the chance to play with experimental medicine without oversight. This interview is over. Vance started to stand. No, it's not. The moderator's voice was sharp. General, you agreed to answer questions. Captain Reeves has presented evidence of falsified reports, manipulated consent forms, and covered-up deaths. You need to respond to that. Vance sat back down, her face tight with barely contained rage. The programs were authorized. By you, Sarah said. You authorized them, you ran them, and you covered up the failures. That's not national security. That's corruption. I followed protocol. You ignored protocol every time it was convenient. Sarah pulled out another document. This is an email from you to a subordinate dated 3 years ago. You're discussing how to reclassify trial deaths to avoid congressional oversight. You literally wrote, "We can't afford another investigation," and outlined steps to falsify medical records. The studio went silent. Vance's face had gone pale. That email is classified. It was classified. Now it's evidence. Sarah looked at the camera. Everything I've said tonight is backed by documentation that's being released to federal prosecutors, congressional oversight committees, and media outlets as we speak. The cover-up is over. You've endangered national security by releasing classified information. You endangered soldiers by treating them as disposable. Sarah's voice was steady now, certain. And you don't get to hide behind national security when what you're really protecting is your own reputation. Vance stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Yes, you do, the moderator said. You're a public servant, General. These are serious allegations. You owe it to the families, to the soldiers, and to the American people to answer them. I've answered them. Everything I did was authorized and necessary. Vance looked directly at Sarah. You want to know the truth? Yes, I authorized experimental trials. Yes, we lost people, but the alternative was sending soldiers into combat without every advantage we could give them. The research from those programs has saved hundreds of lives. So if you want to condemn me for that, go ahead. But understand that every soldier who came home alive because of better medicine, better treatments, better understanding of combat trauma, that's on me too. And the soldiers who died? Sarah asked quietly. The ones whose families were lied to? What about them? They knew the risks. They didn't. That's the point. You didn't give them a choice. You didn't tell them the truth. You just used them and hoped nobody would ask questions. Sarah paused. And when someone did ask questions, when I tried to report what was happening, you had me silenced, discharged, discredited. You tried to make sure nobody would ever believe me. Because you were a security risk. Because I was telling the truth. Sarah looked at the families in the audience. And you couldn't allow that. Vance opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time, she looked uncertain, trapped. The moderator spoke into the silence. General Vance, do you deny authorizing the reclassification of trial deaths? A pause. Then, I acted within my authority. That's not an answer. Did you or did you not falsify medical records to avoid oversight? Another pause. Longer this time. I made decisions that I believed served the greater good. By lying to families about how their loved ones died, Vance's hands clenched. This interview is over. She ripped off her microphone and stood, walking off the set while cameras followed her. The studio erupted, journalists shouting questions, family members demanding answers, the moderator trying to maintain order while Vance disappeared through a side door. Sarah sat frozen in her chair watching it happen. She'd won. Not completely, not cleanly, but she'd forced Vance to break, to walk away, to expose herself as someone with something to hide. The moderator turned to Sarah. Captain Reeves, what happens now? Sarah took a breath. Now we wait for justice. Real justice. Not the kind that gets buried in classified reports, but the kind that holds powerful people accountable for their actions. She looked at the camera. General Vance walked off this stage, but she can't walk away from the evidence. Federal prosecutors are reviewing the files right now. Congressional committees are demanding investigations. And the families of the soldiers who died deserve answers. What about you? What's next for you? Sarah thought about the past 3 years. The running, the hiding, the constant fear. All of it was about to be over, one way or another. I'm going to rebuild my life. I'm going to work again as a nurse, help people, do what I trained to do. And I'm going to make sure that what happened to these soldiers never happens again. The interview ended. Sarah walked off the set into chaos. Journalists surrounding her, cameras flashing, security trying to establish space. Matthews and Garrett appeared at her sides, guiding her through the crowd toward an exit. Outside, Kelly was waiting with tears streaming down her face. You did it. She's finished. Maybe, Sarah said. But she was smiling, actually smiling, for the first time in 3 years. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By midnight, 3 federal investigations had been announced. By morning, Congress had called for hearings. By the afternoon, Brigadier General Patricia Vance had been placed on administrative leave pending a full inquiry into her conduct. The news coverage was relentless. Every major outlet was running stories about the medical trials, interviewing family members, digging through public records looking for more evidence. Some defended Vance, arguing she'd been unfairly ambushed. Most didn't. Sarah watched it unfold from the safe house Matthews had arranged. An actual safe house this time, with legitimate security and legal backing. Webb kept her updated on the media storm, forwarding clips and articles. You're a household name now, he said during one call. People are calling you a whistleblower, a hero. Some are calling you worse, but you're not invisible anymore. Good, Sarah said. Invisible is what got me hunted for 3 years. 2 weeks later, federal prosecutors announced they were filing charges against General Vance and 14 others connected to the medical trials. Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, involuntary manslaughter. The list went on. Vance's lawyers immediately began fighting back, but the evidence was overwhelming. More whistleblowers came forward, including military personnel who'd been involved in the cover-up and couldn't live with it anymore. The careful structure Vance had built to protect herself collapsed piece by piece. Sarah testified before Congress 6 times. Each session was grueling, but she never wavered. She had the evidence, she had the truth, and she had nothing left to lose. 3 months after the interview, Vance was formally arrested. The video of her being escorted out of her office in handcuffs went viral immediately. Sarah didn't watch it. She was too busy with other things. Kelly's sister was safe, living with relatives in another state. The soldiers from the convoy were recovering, most of them testifying in the ongoing trials. Matthews and Garrett had been cleared of all charges and reinstated with commendations for their roles in exposing the conspiracy. And Sarah had received an offer that surprised her more than anything else in this entire ordeal. The director of Riverside General Hospital called personally. "We owe you an apology, several actually, and we'd like to offer you your job back with a significant promotion and a formal written apology in your personnel file." Sarah had been tempted to tell them exactly where they could put their apology, but Kelly convinced her otherwise. "Make them acknowledge what they did," Kelly said. "Make them look you in the eye and admit they were wrong. That matters." So Sarah went back to Riverside General, not as the quiet nurse everyone ignored, but as the director of emergency medicine, a newly created position with authority to implement changes and oversight protocols. Dr. Marcus Aldrich wasn't there. He'd resigned 2 months earlier and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. Sarah didn't know where he'd gone, and she didn't care. Her first day back, Sarah walked through the ER she'd been thrown out of 5 months earlier. The same nurses who'd watched her humiliation now greeted her with awkward respect. The doctors who'd dismissed her now asked for her input. She wasn't going to pretend it didn't feel good. It did. But it wasn't why she'd fought. Sarah stood in the trauma bay where she'd once restocked supplies and been mocked for her military training. Now she was implementing new protocols based on everything she'd learned in combat zones. Protocols that would save lives because someone was finally listening. One of the younger nurses approached hesitantly. "Dr. Reeves, can I ask you something?" Sarah smiled at the title. She'd finally finished her doctorate during the months of legal proceedings. "Sure. When you were here before, when everyone treated you like you didn't matter, how did you handle it?" Sarah thought about that for a moment. "I didn't handle it well. I got angry. I wanted to prove them wrong. But mostly, I just kept working, kept trying to do the job right, because I knew that eventually the truth would matter more than anyone's opinion of me. And if the truth hadn't come out, if General Vance had succeeded in burying everything, then I'd still be running, still be hiding, still be the person everyone dismissed." Sarah looked around the ER, her ER now, but I'm not, because I refused to stay silent, even when silence was safer. That's the only power we really have, the choice to speak or to hide. Everything else is just consequences. The nurse nodded slowly and went back to work. Sarah checked her watch. Time for rounds. Time to do the job she'd trained for, fought for, nearly died for. She was still exhausted, still dealing with lawyers and depositions, still waking up at night remembering the hospital under siege, the bullets, the blood. But she was here. She was working. And she was no longer invisible. 6 months later, Sarah stood at a memorial service for the soldiers who died in the medical trials. 15 headstones, 15 families, and more media coverage than she would have preferred. But it mattered. The families needed this. The soldiers deserved it. General Vance was in federal custody awaiting trial. Her lawyers were still fighting, but the prosecution's case was airtight. Sarah would testify when the time came, but for now, she focused on honoring the dead. Reyes stood beside her, his burns still visible but healing. Martinez would have liked this. All of us here together, the truth finally out. "Yeah," Sarah agreed. "He would have." "You think justice will actually happen? Real consequences?" "I think we gave it the best chance we could. The rest is up to the courts." Sarah looked at the headstones. "But at least their families know the truth now. That's something. More than something. It was everything." Kelly approached with Emma beside her, the sister who'd been used as a threat, now safe and healing. "There's a journalist here asking for you, says she wants to do a feature on life after whistleblowing." Sarah almost said no. She'd done enough interviews. But then she reconsidered. "Tell her I'll talk, but not about the trials, about what comes after, about rebuilding. Because that was the story nobody told. The part where you survived the war and had to figure out how to live with what you'd learned, what you'd lost, what you'd become. Sarah was still figuring that out, but she was doing it in the open now, with people who respected her, in a place where her voice mattered. That night she returned to her apartment, the first permanent address she'd had in 3 years. It wasn't much. Small, barely furnished, nothing special. But it was hers, and nobody was hunting her anymore. She made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city lights. Her phone buzzed with messages, interview requests, legal updates, colleagues asking questions about new protocols. She'd answer them tomorrow. Tonight, she just sat with the quiet. Sarah Reeves had been a soldier, then a nurse, then a fugitive. Now she was something else, someone who'd fought power and won, someone who'd proven that truth could survive even when people tried to bury it. She wasn't naive enough to think the system had changed completely. Vance would be replaced. Other programs would continue. Power would protect itself the way it always did. But 15 families had answers now. 8 soldiers had survived. And Sarah Reeves, the nurse they'd dismissed, humiliated, and tried to destroy, had stood in front of the entire country and refused to be silenced. That mattered. Maybe more than any single victory or conviction. Because somewhere, another person was being dismissed, overlooked, treated like they didn't matter. And maybe, if they were lucky, they'd remember that a quiet nurse from Riverside General had proved that silence was a choice, not a requirement. That speaking up was dangerous but survivable. That the people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage they don't understand. Sarah finished her coffee and stood, ready to sleep without fear for the first time in years. Tomorrow she'd go back to the hospital, back to saving lives. Back to the work she'd never stopped loving, even when it nearly killed her. But tonight, she simply existed, free, vindicated, unbroken. And that was enough.